The 17th Virgin Doctor Who new adventure, Birthright, was the first major Doctor Light story in the franchise, led by companions Ace and Bernice Summerfield. Set concurrently, from the TARDIS team's perspective, would the next book be a Doctor-focused adventure that utilised the lack of companions to try and shine a different light on the franchise's lead character? No. Welcome back to the Library of St John the Beheaded, a history of Doctor Who in prose, and this time we will be taking a look at Iceberg by David Banks. David Banks is best known to Doctor Who fans for playing the role of the Cyber Leader in Earthshock, The Five Doctors, Attack of the Cybermen and Silver Nemesis, a role which he would reprise many years later for Big Finish audio stories, Hour of the Cybermen, Conversion and The Trials of a Time Lord. Clearly taken with the role, he also went on to write the reference book Doctor Who Cybermen, telling both the story of the development of the fictional cyborgs and also an in-universe history of the race, collated from all the information given on screen and in writing, and presented as something resembling a coherent narrative. This history also formed the basis of the audiobook series The Archive Tapes, read and produced by Banks. Similarly, he narrated the audiobooks of the Target versions of Attack of the Cybermen and Silver Nemesis. And in a rare non-Cybermen related appearance, he also played Carl in the Doctor Who stage play The Ultimate Adventure, as well as its Big Finish adaptation, and also played the Doctor for one performance covering for an ill John Pertwee. Oh, and he also produced a series of Doctor Who audio interviews with various Doctor actors. It's fair to say then that Doctor Who, and the Cybermen in particular, were things he was invested in. He was the first actor from the show to write for the Virgin New Adventures, adding in some further variety, and if the cover, designed by Andrew Skilleter, he of dozens of Doctor Who book and video covers in his first Virgin New Adventure work since creating the 4 Time Worm cover images. If the cover didn't give it away, it wouldn't take much imagination to work out who the villains would be in Iceberg, just given the author's name. Indeed, Banks based a lot of the book around his own Cybermen history, it forming the backbone of the continuity that Iceberg features heavily. Banks had originally submitted the story as a possible make-your-own adventure book called Flipback in the 80s, before fleshing it out considerably for its novel form. Iceberg isn't just the first Cybermen story in the New Adventures, it's the first recurring villain full stop. Not bad given it's the 18th book in the series. Yeah, we've had references to species and individuals from the TV series, too many in all honesty, but this is the first time a story's main villain hasn't been one created by the author themselves. Well, unless you count different people using the Time Worm, I suppose. Given Banks' work narrating other Cyberman stories, it's perhaps unsurprising that Iceberg became the first Virgin New Adventure to be released as an audiobook, narrated by Banks. The book's prelude, published in Doctor Who magazine 204, must have confused a few people as it's more of a prelude to the 1968 TV story The Invasion than a new novel. Isabel Watkins is photographing Tobias Vaughan while Vaughan is considering his plans to take over the world. Not so surprising in itself, given that it's the first book in the series to feature a recurring enemy from the TV show, but Iceberg is by far the most steeped in continuity that any new adventure has been so far. This is less about little nods to the show's history and fanwank, and more a case of Banks wanting to canonise his own Cyberman history. His book had been republished by Virgin in 1990, and here it was about to become the backbone of a story in the show's official continuation. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you can expect from Iceberg. International Electromatics and Tobias Vaughan are mentioned on page 2. The events of the final confrontation of the invasion are seen from the perspective of the cyber ship in orbit around the moon. Some of the Cybermen from this ship survive and crash in the Antarctic. The book's surrogate companion's father was paralysed. He was hit by a motorbike while reading news about the 10th planet in a newspaper. The same companion once wrote about Isabel Watkins' experiences in the invasion. Pam Cutler is the daughter of General Cutler who dies in the 10th planet. She's now also a general and has been put in charge of the Antarctic base in which that story was set. And it turns out the Mondans, not called Mondasian Cybermen until many years later, refuse to fully augment their bodies and minds in an explanation of why they look and sound so different to the later Cybermen designs which had settled on Telos. In terms of book continuity, we're not treated to so much of an onslaught. The pollution and smog seen in London feels like a step in the direction of the world seen in Warhead. Whether it's intentional or simply similar predictions is unknown, but I like the connection. The world building continues in this direction. Security on the cruise ship, on which much of the book is set, is by the US conservative militia group FF. Their phonetic similarity to the SS almost certainly intentional, in a depressing parallel with the real world in 2026. Similarly, very fittingly for a book set in 2006, there's a paranoia about Arab terrorists. And then there's climate change, war, or a pandemic. Well, yeah. The appearance of ECUs instead of euros as currency, and them being used in Britain, feels less prophetic. There's a subtle hint that the UK's king is Harry, which is kind of amusing in hindsight. The Doctor briefly thinks about Kadiatu, which is about the only direct reference to the past New Adventures, though. I've not read Cyberman, but Banks clearly has his own contributions to make to the unit dating issue. Here, International Electromatics and Tobias Vaughan are contemporary with punk, and Banks slips in a reference to a girl's fishnet thigh, because it's New Adventure, which sets the invasion at about 1976 at the very earliest, and how this lines up with the later BBC book Rags, set well into the Joe Grant era and in 1977, remains to be seen. The book opens with several quotes from the likes of Descartes and T.S. Eliot, suggesting a literary slant to proceedings. And although maybe not literature of a high art style, Banks does write very well. His prose is richly detailed but never laborious. There are lots of wonderful little moments, such as the second chapter opening with a bug, a ladybird, being reflected in the third chapter opening with a bug, a computer glitch. Different characters are enamoured with a comic book character called the Faceless Biker, which is also a nickname Ruby gives to the man who paralysed her father. Guest characters, even though not seen much, have internal monologues, motives, individual characteristics. Icebergs are used as metaphors, but not so much as to hammer the point home. Themes of efficiency, cybernetics, time travel, the human heart, even jade pagodas all appear throughout the book in different settings. David Banks has clearly enjoyed writing a novel rather than simply a story. There's no prologue, but the first single-page chapter is set late in the book as a flash-forward, so it serves the same kind of purpose. Iceberg's companion is Ruby, Duval, not Sunday, obviously. I say companion, she's less of a one-off companion and more of the book's main character. Most of it's seen from her perspective, and given that Iceberg is effectively the Doctor's solo book to Birthright's Dr. Light, it may surprise you that he doesn't properly turn up until page 142. We briefly see him leave the TARDIS in the hands of Benny and Ace, and then it's Ruby's book for a while. She's a journalist writing for the Sunday Seeker. Her journalism tutor was James Stephens, a character who will appear in a later book, at which point we'll also learn that he once taught Sarah Jane Smith. Ruby's on a cruise ship documenting its journey to Antarctica and back for the Seeker. It's also Pam's book, with her taking charge at the Antarctic base. This is the focus for a few chapters in the middle. Things here are tense, well, they would be in that situation, and aren't helped by Pam arriving to get their work sped up. The base is the home of the Flipback project, designed to counter or reverse a potential pole reversal in the Earth's geomagnetic field. Also not helping matters is the corpse of a 10,000-year-old Cyberman found on the ice sheet, not to mention the numerous people and ships, and now an entire Japanese research base, that have gone missing nearby. Ruby spends the first chunk of the book having a nice time on the ship with two cabaret artists, Diana and Leslie, as well as meeting celebrity sculptor with a secret, Mike Brack, and the ship's companion with his mechanical leg. This goes alongside Ruby's weekly use of a virtual reality cyberspace machine in mirroring the story's main threat. But this 100-ish pages is as gentle as the new adventures have been so far, slow-paced but in a deliberate, almost cosy kind of way. As the ship approaches Antarctica, Brack begins to behave more suspiciously. A terrorist stowed away disappears in the middle of the night, believed to have fallen overboard. and Ruby grows increasingly curious about the unreachable lowest deck of the vessel. So yes, anyway, the Doctor eventually arrives on page 142 of a 253-page book. He travels using the Jade Pagoda in its first appearance, a small piece of the TARDIS which has been separated from the main ship. It has vaguely TARDIS-like shape of a green Chinese stone booth. The journey has given the Doctor some amnesia, and in usual style he's arrived just when things are kicking off. On Antarctica, 2 of the base's crew have disappeared, while 2 more have shown up in a cold, emotionless state. The Doctor and Ruby quickly team up and take the Jade Pagoda there, and that's where the tone shifts quite dramatically. Iceberg is definitely an adult book, sex is discussed quite candidly throughout, but when Ruby begins to explore the tunnels beneath the surface of Antarctica, things get a lot darker. The first thing she finds is a dismembered hand, and then further body parts, and then organs grouped by type, a row of human hearts, a body flayed of its outer layer of skin and with its eyes, ears and genitals removed, brain exposed. A neck to groin incision is kept in place by a zip, and the ribs are reinforced with metal. The body horror of the Cybermen is something the TV show has frequently shied away from. Outside of a couple of 60s stories and Attack of the Cybermen, they're mostly just a metal army at this point, so to get this level of detail and gore does a pretty good job of showing why they're just a horrible and formidable foe. Either way, Ruby has found the various missing people and entered the darker third of the book. She finds the Doctor is also investigating, and they spend some time escaping the Cybermen's lair. While they're arriving back at the research base, only to find everyone there is now under cyber control, Cybermen surgeons are experimenting on one of the scientists. Flesh and bone are cut, organs are removed and fed to insects that produce useful enzymes in the consumption of eating organic matter. Plastic metal compounds are prepared to strengthen the bones. Skin is thinned out by deploying these same insects onto the body. The finale sees the Cybermen emerging from their base inside the face of the Sunday Seeker's owner, Lord Straker. This is an iceberg sculpture by Mike Brack, created by Laser, and not Lord Straker's actual face, and they invade the cruise ship to get new human stock. These Cybermen are resistant to gold, but Brack uses his laser to take out a bunch. In the midst of the attack, Banks has time to throw in some humour still. The cabaret, staging a comedic performance of The Wizard of Oz, are halted by a Cyberman appearing, and Diana assumes it's someone in a Tin Man costume, so she plays a prank and covers it in champagne. It doesn't laugh. At one point, Ruby jams the virtual reality machine on the head of a Cyberman, disorienting it massively with the visual experience of it floating over a beautiful landscape. I'd quite like to know what it was thinking at that point. It's a tightly plotted book. This is Chekhov's virtual reality machine. No incident or detail is wasted. Anything that we come across, even just slightly earlier in the book, tends to come back in a very plot-centric way later on. At this point, we're all expecting there to be an Earth agent working for the Cybermen. There usually is, after all. But it turns out that the cybernetic machine Brack has been working on in the secret lower deck is actually only for the production of Wizard of Oz. It's the Wizard's machine, and that's a genuinely fun little twist. At the climax, the Doctor meets the Cyber Controller, not for the first time for him, of course, but for the first time for the cyborg, which has only just been created, as a result of the particularly grotesque experiments witnessed earlier in the book. This, and the opening and closing of mouth slots, confirm that these are the Tomb of the Cybermen and Moonbase style Cybermen. This is the first time we've truly gone backwards in the Cybermen's timeline, and it's also the first time in the show's fictional continuity that we get a hint that the Cybermen different designs are actually different eras of the race, rather than simply updates in the production. The cyber plan to destroy the flipback machine and allow Earth to suffer a catastrophic magnetic reversal goes wrong due to the cognitive effects of the reversal on the hypnotised people guarding the device, allowing the Doctor to distill the bomb, which Ruby duly deposits in the Cybermen's base. It's not the most action-packed climax, but it does neatly tie things up. We do get a little more after that too. Mike Brack's guilt, what he'd spent the book wanting to tell Ruby what he was being very suspicious about, was of course not that he was working with the Cybermen, Turns out he was the motorcyclist who had paralysed Ruby's father the moment that defined and shaped her life. Sometimes putting in emotional connections between characters can be just really bad and contrived. It's a hack plot, really. But this is done really well. It makes sense of Brack's reactions throughout the book, and they're required to make the suspense work. And it's done in a subtle way, a single sentence, with his actual explanation left to happen between scenes. It's also the end of an emotional journey for Ruby, one she needs to complete to be ready to become a companion. She's made peace with her trauma, and the Doctor is happy for her to join him. Sadly, the Jade Pagoda can't survive away from the TARDIS any longer and leaves before she has chance to run and join him. If she hadn't helped Mike to survive, she'd have been aboard when it left, in a bittersweet irony. Still, this isn't quite the last we'll see of Ruby Duval, but that's a story for another day, or another year, probably. Something we get for the first time is the perspective of a Cyberman. One has what is referred to as an emotional memory, a once-in-a-century or so glitch when a hint of the Cyberman's past life rises to the surface before being subdued again. We learn of the race's 3 goals: survival, efficiency and control, and the logic behind them. They live in what they refer to as their post-organic era, and the conversion process is referred to as dismantling and reconstructing of human bodies. Getting this kind of perspective is an example of the books offering something other forms of media cannot. Getting inside the mind of a Cyberman, seeing its thought processes, it's all fascinating stuff, and reminiscent of some of the Dalek stuff in Ben Aronovich's Remembrance of the Daleks novelisation. The Doctor is in the book so little that it's hard to comment on him too much. At one point he saves Ruby by distracting the Cyberman with a lion impression, which is novel. In contrast, when pointing out the pair of them can be converted, he physically shudders and his voice trembles. What we see of him is a warmer portrayal than we often get of Seven, certainly in the books. This is the lovable uncle as oft seen joshing with Ace in season 25. David Banks clearly has no interest in contributing to the Cartmel master plan. He carries on him a bag of lemon drops, and in Earth years he's approaching his 1000th birthday. There are once again spelling mistakes, quite a few, and Banks uses variations on the word paroxysm a bit too much in the first half. It ends up being so glaring that it feels like he's only using it to look clever. On the whole, the editing is tighter than on, say, Shadowmind, but the team are still lagging at this point. The swearometer registers 3 fucks, 2 wankers, an arse, a bastard, and a buggeration. Sex and erotic photos are discussed openly, the word dildonics appears, and marijuana is mentioned. Iceberg is a very strong book. The writing is excellent, richly detailed and tightly plotted. The imagery is vivid and graphic. The prose is full of little asides, trains of thought, mirrored concepts, to the extent that it's almost too clever for its own good, but not quite. It manages to strike the right balance. The Cybermen are portrayed in a way that shines a new light on them, while managing to recapture the fear that made their very concept so scary in the 60s. It's pacey and exciting without sacrificing character, emotion or nuance. But it splits opinion. While I've come across many others like myself, Stacey Smith is incredibly positive in Bookwyrm Volume 1, for example. I've also seen a number of very negative responses to Iceberg. The reasons cited include the large absence of the Doctor, especially in a companion-free book, the heavy reliance on Cybermen continuity, the almost jarring shifts in tone, and the quite gory body horror. And I do appreciate all of these criticisms. It's a book with a very particular appeal that some will find very difficult going. But for me, there's a strong story that's very well written, and that will always make it a favourite of mine. Favourite quotes? Well, there's a lot to love in the text of Iceberg, but I'll highlight a couple of passages that I particularly enjoyed. Well, I say enjoyed. The Cyberman dodged away from a falling piston, only to be pummeled by another. It was bounced into the path of a bulky elbow which smashed across its chest and through it. From the slit of its mouth a thick white liquid spewed out. Suddenly bits of Cyberman were everywhere. Green viscous liquid coated the moving steel. Ruby thought she'd caught a glimpse of yellow flesh amongst the carnage. The massive engine did not falter. It felt no compunction at dismembering a Cyberman. It owed no allegiance to the cyber race. It had one job to do, to power the ship, to drive it forward. That was its goal, implacable. If anything got in its way, man or machine, it was a struggle for supremacy. Might was right, as the Cybermen knew well. Strongest always won. This time the Cyberman had met its match, torn limb from limb, discarded, no longer whole, not even the sum of its parts, redundant, decommissioned. Earth was a world in turmoil. She could not think of a country that was not untroubled by terrorism or war or riot or privation. The 20th century had ended not with a bang, but had merely subsided, whimpering into a new millennium that looked at best unpromising, at worst a nightmare. The litany of 21st century troubles seemed never-ending, served up in graphic daily detail on TV news and documentaries or in the papers. The spectre of a changing climate haunted the planet. Earth's magnetic field was growing unstable. The protective ozone hole was getting bigger with every passing year. Famine and drought were becoming commonplace. Fresh water was in short supply worldwide. Oil was still plentiful, too plentiful. Careless managing, atrocious accidents, deliberate acts of environmental vandalism in the name of one cause or another had left no coast untainted, no species of bird untouched. Rivers added their poisonous cocktail of heavy metals and polluting chemicals to the overburdened oceans of the world. The marine environment was on the edge of breakdown. The sea was slowly dying. Then there was the plague. The word was used loosely to cover the various diseases that were waging war against mankind. They might be smoking related or caused by radiation, bad eating habits, the wrong kind of sex, or even by increasing ozone depletion. But people had lost interest in trying to avoid the plague. It could always take you unawares, no matter how saintly or peculiar your lifestyle. People had simply accepted the plague as a natural backdrop to their lives. They had learned to live with it. It was taking a serious toll on life. World population was actually starting to fall. This extraordinary phenomenon, seen in the previous century as a solution to all the world's ills, was accompanied by another. Male fertility rates were reducing rapidly worldwide. The human race was losing its capacity to reproduce itself. On current trends, zero population would be reached before the next century was out. There was a part of Ruby that rather relished the idea. A world with no people in it, and therefore no pollution, no acts of gross barbarism, no meddling human intelligence to get in the way of the purity of nature. But in her heart, she knew it was all pure fantasy. She was part of nature too, so was the human race. Global infertility, pandemic plague, the breakdown of civilization, this was nature's way of telling us to slow down. Of course, the search was now on to extend the span of life of those alive now. Gene manipulation, organ transplants, bodily augmentation, cryogenics, all were being pursued in deadly earnest. Ruby wasn't sure she liked the idea of living for 1,000 years, but mature as she felt, she was only 21. She knew she might feel differently when she was 64. Mercifully, for the present, Ruby was free of all that, the bags and baggage of all her possible futures. The weight of the world had fallen from her. She had sailed away from it. She was somewhere else, in a limbo world, over the rainbow. And on that cheery note, we come to the end of what I tend to think of as the 4th season of the Virgin New Adventures, covering Lucifer Rising, White Darkness, Shadow Mind, Birthright, and Iceberg. Not a terrible run, with a reasonably strong end, and one which acts to introduce this new, slightly tense 3-person TARDIS team. The next season will be very different indeed, as we return to arcs once more, for a run of 5 interconnected stories, opening with Blood Heat by Jim Mortimer. Press the subscribe button if you haven't already and want to be informed when that goes up, and do drop me a like or a comment down below, and I hope you'll join me for the next trip to the library of St. John the Beheaded. Is by the US conservative military It's by the U.S. conservative. It's by the U.S. military. It's by, oh, for